Hello everyone, this is part 2 of a video series on DynamoDB fine-grained access controls. In this video, I'm going to show you how to lock down your DynamoDB table and give a permission policy to users that restrict access to certain rows and certain attributes. So I'm going to do these independently at the start, so show you how to do it for just rows and then show you how to do it for just attributes. And then I'm going to combine everything together to show you how to restrict on both the row and the attribute level. And so I wanted to just show you kind of how this is going to work. So I already have a customer's orders table that already exists and has some data in it. And then I have a user that wants to access certain attributes of this table. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to create a IAM user. Well, I already have one created, so we're not going to create one. And then we are going to attach a policy around that user that's going to have some very specific permissions that are going to restrict those attributes on this particular table. So that's what we're going to be doing in this video. So let's jump on over to the console. All right, everyone. So here we are in the AWS console. Now, before we jump into the specifics of the DynamoDB stuff, I just wanted to call out that for this demonstration, I am logged into 2 distinct accounts right now. I'm logged into one account right now, which is, as you can see in the top right, this is my administrator access account. So this has permissions to do anything I want. And then in my other window down here, which I just opened up for you, you can see I am logged into a different account up here, which is AWS simplified _user. This is going to be the account or the user account that we want to give all of our DynamoDB permissions to. So I'm going to be hopping back between these back and forth just to show you how the permissions affect the results that you get back when you're trying to interact with Dynamo. So let's start with my administrator account, which has all the permissions. So you can see here, obviously I'm in the DynamoDB section. I clicked on the tables tab over on the left, and we already have a table that exists. This is our customer orders table. And to take a look at our items, if you just go to the top right here and click on the view items section, and then you scroll all the way down, you can see we have 3 different items that are in this table. So we have customer ID, so customer 1, customer 2, customer 3. Then we have order ID, so order 1, order 2, order 3. We have a common attribute, which we want to make available to basically our external user, and that's called order total with different double values here. And then we have a restricted attribute, and this is some sensitive information that we don't want to expose. We don't want to give away this data to that particular user. Okay, so that's the data that we're working with. You can see on this account, like I can do scan operations and we can see all the data that's in there, right? So we have complete access. Now, if we move over to the other account has basically no permissions for this table. It doesn't even have permissions to look at tables. So if we're on this account and we go to the tables section, as you can see here, we don't even see anything. We don't see, the table name. We can't click into anything. Obviously, we can't interact with DynamoDB at all through the console. So what we first need to do is we need to give this user some permissions to access our DynamoDB table. And switching back to the user administrator account over here, what I want to do is I want to give this user access to, let's start out with just this row. So the row that has customer 1 in it. So that's what I want to give this user access to, this row and all of its data, even the restricted stuff to start out. Okay, so how do we do that? The way that we do that is we need to attach a IAM policy to that particular user. So what I've done here is I have a second tab open for my administrator account, and I want to go to the IAM section, or Identity and Access Management section. If you're not familiar with IAM, you don't really know how it works, I have a video that I'll put in the description section below to teach you more about that. You may want to watch that first before you watch this section, or you may be confused. Okay, so here we are in the IAM section. So if I go over to the users section over on the left here, we can actually see that user, like that guest user that I am logged into in the other window. And it's AWS simplified _user. And so I'm going to click on this guy, and you're going to see like we basically have no permissions. So we're under the permissions tab by default. We can see we have no permissions here, basically just the ability to change our own password. Which is fine, but we want to obviously give ourselves the ability to access DynamoDB in this demonstration. So the way that we need to do this is we need to go to the policies section, so we can create a policy first and then go ahead and attach it to this user. A policy is essentially a thing that specifies certain permissions to certain resources, and then you can effectively staple that on to multiple users. You can associate it with roles. There's a whole bunch of things that you can do. Anyways, let's go to the policies section. And what I want to do now is in the top right over here, this blue button, I want to create a new policy. So I'm going to click on this guy. And so this default screen here is we're under the visual editor. This is pretty handy. Like you can go through this and like use the wizard and basically do whatever you want to do. But I already have the JSON policy that we need in order to get the permission that we want to the customer one row. So I'm going to click on this JSON tab over here, and you can see it just spits out this empty JSON object here. I'm going to erase that, and then just off screen I have a policy that I already set up, and I'm just going to paste that in here and explain to you what's going on. So let's go to the top here. So we have the version, we have the statement, no point in talking about that. We have effect allow, and we are basically giving this user access to the batch get item API, the get item API, and the query API. So this is essentially going to be a read-only user using these specific APIs. By the way, a lesson that I learned is that you can't restrict permissions on your scan. So if you try to like put in scan here and you're expecting that DynamoDB is not going to show like customer 2, customer 3 when the user tries to scan, that's not how this works. I haven't found a way to restrict access to certain rows using the scan API. So just keep that in mind. This only seems to work for these APIs and I think just a couple other read APIs. But anyways, the next resource or the next entry here is our resource, and this is just the ARN of our DynamoDB table. Now, if you don't know how to get that, very, very easy. Just going back to our Dynamo table over here and going back to the table section and clicking on our table again. And it's over here on the right. You can click this little box and that'll copy it to your clipboard, and then you can go ahead and paste that in. So going back to IAM, so we put in that resource, and this second section here, or this other section down here, is really where the interesting stuff happens. So we're specifying a condition, and in this condition, we're saying for all values, we're running a string equal operation or a string equal comparison. And then we're using this entry here, DynamoDB leading keys. And this is the special entry that you need to use to restrict access to certain keys for your table. So by using DynamoDB leading keys, what we're essentially telling Dynamo is for our partition key, we only want this user to be able to get values that are customer 1. And if you remember in our table, we had customer 1, customer 2, customer 3. So this is only going to give access for that first row, right? So that's all you really need to do for getting access to this stuff. So if you scroll down here, now what I also wanted to do was to give my guest user the ability to not only list tables, so to actually see a list of them on the console, but to actually describe those tables. So be able to click into those tables to interact with it through the console as well. So that's all you have to do here. This looks good. Oh, by the way, there's a star here for this second section. If you want to restrict this even further, you can do a similar exercise. So you can put this ARN in and put this down below. So you're only allowing list tables and describe table for that particular table. But it doesn't matter for us here. So I'm going to go to the bottom right and click on tags now. I think I already mentioned though, but I'm going to be making this policy available so that you can download it. I'll put a gist in the description section below of this video. Okay, so going to the bottom, clicking on next, and we're not going to add tags. We're just going to review here. We're going to give this thing a name. So order access policy. Let's just leave it as that. You probably want to give it like a more descriptive name based on the rows that it's going to be restricted to. So like customer 1 in this case, but this is fine for me. Anyways, we're going to create that policy now, and this sometimes takes a moment. So let's just give it a second here. Okay, so that policy is now created. So if we type in order here, we should see a filter. So order access policy. So that's the one that we just created. And if you expand that, you can see basically this is what we just put in. All right, so now we need to associate this user with this policy. So go to users, and now we want to click the user that we want to give guest access to. And by the way, if you don't know how to create a user, I also have a video on that, so you can go and watch that to get familiar with this process. Put that in the description section below as well. So clicking on this guy, and now we want to add more permissions. So we want to add that policy for this particular user. So we're going to click on add permissions now. And we are going to say in this top section here to attach existing policies directly. So we're going to click on this. Now in this search box, we're going to type in our access policy name, and you can see it's right here. So order access policy. So I'm going to click on this, and we're going to go next to review, and we're going to do add permissions. And now we can see this user has this policy associated with them. So if we go back to our other window now, which is for this particular user, for the AWS simplified user that I'm currently logged into, you can see right now we can't see anything, but all you have to do is refresh the page and we should be able to see the tables, which is exactly what we can see. So now clicking on this, I want to kind of tinker with this a little bit and show you how you can only access certain rows now. So clicking on customer orders and going to the top right again for view items. And you can see here, if we try to scan, we don't have the permission to scan. So if you try to run this, you see user blah, 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 blah is not authorized to perform blah, blah, blah. So we don't have permission to do that, but we do have permission to query. Now, as a reminder, queries only let you look up rows by specific IDs. I have a whole video on how this works that you can watch as well. But recall that we have customer one. That was a key that is in our table. So if we click on run now, we can see that we get customer one back and we're getting all the information that's associated with customer one. Now, if I try to do the same thing for customer two, you're going to see we get an error here. And that is deliberate. That's because we didn't give the user permission in the policy section to access rows with the leading key of customer two. We only gave them customer one. So that shows you how to restrict access at the row level. What I want to show you now is how we can modify this so that we can restrict access also at the attribute level. So just to put in this back and show our data again, so clicking on run. So down here, we can access the restricted attribute customer address attribute right now. And this is bad, right? We don't want this user to be able to access this particular attribute. This one is fine. The common attribute, which is the order total, the order ID is fine, and the customer ID is also fine. So what we need to do is we need to head back over to our IAM section and slightly modify our policy so that we can restrict the policy to just these three attributes. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, so going to the other tab, so we want to, again, we're in the user section for my guest user and we're on that policy. So I'm going to click on this one because I want to edit it. And we're going to go to edit policy now. And I'm going to paste in, I'm going to go to JSON again. I'm going to paste in a policy that I've already prepared. It's very, very similar to what we just did with only a couple minor differences. So let me just erase what we have and I'll paste in what the new policy is going to be, and I'll explain to you what's going on. So everything up to this point is exactly the same. The only difference now is that we have a new condition. So this condition, we still have that for all values string equals, but what we are using instead this time is we are using DynamoDB attributes. And what this is effectively telling DynamoDB is that I only want the user that has this policy to be able to access these three columns or these three attributes, which are the ones that we just discussed. So this demonstration isn't going to restrict at the row level yet. I'm going to combine these concepts in a couple minutes, but this just shows you how you do it for just the attribute level. And then we also have this thing for string equals if exists, and we have this thing called DynamoDB select. This is making sure it's a required field that you need to put in here so that the user only has access to specific attributes. And which attributes? Well, it's these ones, these three. There are some additional values that you could put in here and some additional entries that you could put in if you want to give update specific permissions. So you want to only allow users to update certain permissions. You need to add some additional records here. I'll leave a good resource or a good blog article that explains that down below in the description section. But for a read-only user, this is all that we really need to do here. Okay, so let's review policy now. By the way, everything else is the same here, so nothing really has changed. So let's go to review policy. And we're going to click on save changes now. And this should all be good. So yeah, everything looks to be fine here. This policy has now been updated. So if we go back to users and we click on our user again, and we look at the order access policy, we should see it's all updated now. So yeah, it's got the DynamoDB attributes, customer ID, order ID, and the other attribute as well. By the way, this is case sensitive, so don't screw this up or else you're going to have an error. Anyways, let's go back to our user now and see if we can access only those particular attributes. So I'm going back to the console and let's just refresh. So going back to tables and going back to customer orders, and we'll go back to view items. And And okay, so let's try to run this again. So clicking on run now, and you can see here, we tried to query customer one. So this should work, technically speaking, right? We didn't restrict querying on customer one. The only thing we restricted was the permission so that we can only access certain attributes. So it turns out, and I spent like hours banging my head against the wall trying to figure out like why this wasn't working, if there was something wrong with my policy or maybe my data or whatever. But it turns out that the reason this doesn't work is because through the console, like through the UI here, anytime you do a query, you're not specifying any projections. And in order for this to work, you need to set a projection. And a projection is basically telling DynamoDB that I only want to look at certain attributes. So only give me back certain attributes. You can't do this through the console, so you have to do it programmatically. So luckily, I was tinkering with this on the side and I wrote the code to do this. So let me just show you what's going on here with the code itself. So let me just make this a little bit bigger so everyone could see. There we go. Okay, so we're using Boto3. This is Python, by the way, doing some imports. We have a constants file. This constants file just contains my access key and my secret access key. We're creating a client for Boto3, which is DynamoDB. We're creating a table. We're using the client.table command, and we're pointing it to our customer orders table. By the way, I'll make all this code available as well. And so what we're saying here is we're saying response is equal to table.query. Remember, we have permissions for query, and we need to give it a projection expression. And projection expression basically tells Dynamo that I only want these attributes. So you can see here, I have these three attributes: customer ID, order ID, and common attribute underscore order total. Now recall that these are the attributes that I do have permission for because that's what I set in my IAM policy. And then I am saying I want just customer ID 1. Or I want customer ID to equal customer ID 1. So effectively what this thing is going to do is it's going to query for customer ID 1 and only going to return us back these attributes. Now let's test this out. I'm just going to press F5 and run this thing, and let's see what we get back. All right, so we see the common attribute comes back first, and it's a decimal, and we get the correct value back. We get the customer ID, which is customer 1, and we also get the order ID, which is order ID 1. Perfect, so this is working correctly. Now, what I want to do is to show you what happens if you try to access the restricted attribute. So let me just go back really quick and copy that out of Dynamo. So going back to our table, what was the attribute name? I can't remember. Yeah, here we are. So restricted attribute underscore customer address. Okay, and let's go change this. This is just a comma separated list, by the way. It does matter the types. So if you have a number, you need to put like a pound sign before it. And there's some specific notation that you need to use when you're using the projection expression. So you may want to look at the documentation here first. Okay, so this looks good to me. Now I'm trying to access something that I do not have access to. So this should fail. So let's just run this again, clicking on that. And yeah, so we see an error occurred, access denied exception when calling the query operation for user, not authorized to perform query on resource, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't really tell you the specific attribute that you don't have access to, which is why I was ripping my hair out when I was trying to figure this out earlier. All right, so closing that, and just to show that this is working for some other examples, I just want to remove this and just change this to customer 2 to show you that we can access all of the rows now. So put that in there, and let's just run this again to show that. And yeah, so now we have access to the second one here, which is customer 2, order ID 2, and 99.99. All right, so perfect. So we learned so far how to do the horizontal or the row level access control. We learned how to do the vertical access control, which is the attribute level. So let's combine these two things together so that we can restrict access to the row and the attribute level. So it's pretty easy to do that. The way that you can do that is just going back to the IAM console, just mixing these concepts together. So let's just refresh to show you how I did this. So going to users, going back to our user, and going back to our policy, and we are going to edit the policy when it finally loads. Okay, perfect. And just on the side here, I'm just going to copy out the leading keys thing that I had before, because we're going to paste that in. Okay, got that on my clipboard. So we go back to JSON, and what we need to do is we need to add another entry here for all values string equals. So I'm just going to put a comma in here. And then I'm going to put in that DynamoDB leading keys, which is customer 1, leave everything else the same. We're going to review that policy. We're going to save changes. And everything looks good there. So now let's go back to our code and let's try this again. So we're going to say customer ID 1. So let's make sure that we can access customer 1 and we can access all these 3 attributes. So let's test this out really quick, pressing F5 to run it. And okay, yeah, so we are able to access that. And then we want to test this again to make sure that, actually, let's change users first. Let's change it to customer 2. So customer 2, run that again. This should fail, remember, because we don't have access to customer 2. Yep, so access denied, good. So let's stop this. And I want to paste in that attribute name is again. So that's restricted attribute, customer address. Let's go back over here, paste this guy at the end. And this should also fail because we do not have access to the restricted attribute. So that looks good. Change this back to customer 1. And if we just run this again, we should see that, yeah, we got an error occurred when calling the query operation. This looked a little different. Let me do it the same way I did it before. So we get that pop-up. Yeah, I was using the debugger. So when calling the operation, user blah, blah, blah is not authorized to perform DynamoDB query on resource, blah, blah, blah. So if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to check out my playlist on DynamoDB on the right here. And as always, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.